Welcome everyone to our presentation. My name is Kobe. I'm the one presenting. In my group are also Jonathan Roberts, Savannah Fish, and JD Mann. And we did an open source firewall research, much like the rest of you. But we looked at several different options for open source firewalls, and we're going to present them to you today. So as a quick overview, we researched several open source firewalls, namely OPNSense, Smoothwall, IPFire, and pfSense. But we are going to demo today Kaspersky Antivirus Firewall. It's a firewall built into an antivirus program that you can get on your computer, and we'll be going through that and some of the functionalities that it has. So just kind of an overview of each one. OPNSense, the overview is basically it's an open source and it's based off of FreeBSD, and it's basically like a fork off of pfSense and MonoWall, roughly in the idea that like the source code is basically the same. There's just differences that they have in each one. And they have 2 major releases per year, which is really great. It helps you keep the security updates going, and it also helps you maintain a most updated definitions and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. It features a traffic shaper, 2-factor authentication, VPN stuff, intrusion detection and prevention, NetFlow exporter, and network flow monitoring. The most useful, at least in my opinion, for someone who is looking for a firewall, the most 2 useful things would be a VPN. It's really nice to be able to have VPN functionality because that way you can protect your network while still being able to connect to it outside of the network itself. And the network flow monitoring, that's really helpful because sometimes it gets a little difficult to tell where certain things are going. And for example, in an enterprise environment, it's really important to know where things are traveling in your network so that way you can keep track of it. And you can find, for example, if you have something that's not supposed to be there, stuff like that. So that's those are some of the features of OPNSense, which are really good. The next one we reviewed was Smoothwall, and a quick overview. The first release was near the end of 2000, and the last release so far was 2014. It is Linux based. It was created from scratch. It was not a fork or changed from anything. And it was a custom security hardened OS, so in other words, the developer worked on it himself. He didn't really have help from a lot of other things. And it isn't supported by any parent company. It's kind of just an individual developer running it. So that's pretty cool. That's nice about it. It features things such as LAN, DMZ, and wireless networks, which is really helpful. It lets you forward ports. It lets you find DMZ pinholes and create them as well. It has outbound filtering, timed access, and simple to use QoS, which is really important actually. When you have a really complicated QoS, it makes things difficult for you to work within the network, and it's kind of cumbersome to figure out the issues that are in your network. The LAN and the DMZ and wireless networks is actually really important. Working with those 2 features are really good, and sometimes it can be difficult, but the fact that it supports those things makes it a lot easier. And so those are some things we saw in Smoothwall. The next one we tried out or looked at was IPFire. Again, it's also Linux based, and it was recently released actually. It's very easy to install, and it's designed for new and expert users, which is a really big benefit. It isn't quite as feature rich as the other options since it's so simple. It's a little less. I guess you could say it's a little less comprehensive. But it does feature its own DHCP server and DNS server, which is really nice. And it has an intrusion detection system, which is really helpful. And then it has its own package manager, which is pretty helpful. And finally, the last one we looked at was pfSense, which is based off of, again, the FreeBSD. This is where the OPNSense came out. It's a fork off of pfSense. You don't need knowledge with Unix, and it's a pretty good and familiar interface for those that actually know how commercial firewalls work. For example, if you've worked with an enterprise firewall before in the past, it's relatively simple to swap over to pfSense using their interface, mostly just because of how they've designed it and how well it's put together. It has a lot of different features, so it can filter by source and destination, by OS. It can have a selectable gateway, so like you can choose a certain rule that allows a connection to go through a certain gateway. You have layer 2 firewalling that's possible. And there's a lot of different features, load balancing, DDNS. All of these things are really helpful, and it's really feature rich. One thing about pfSense that's really good is that it's open source, but it has a lot of options, and it's really customizable, and that's really great. However, today the demo that we're going to be using is one in Kaspersky Antivirus, which I've got pulled up here. So the firewall that Kaspersky has, it's a little different from some firewalls. It's its own firewall, but then it also manages Windows Firewall itself a little more. These settings are kind of transferred over to Windows Firewall, but you basically manage the firewall here. So in here on the home page, it just has some general things such as Wi-Fi network vulnerability. It notifies you of those things, which is great. It allows connection on random ports for active FTP mode, which basically means if I need to transfer files back and forth to a server, it allows me to just do that on random ports instead of like making it so that I have to set up a specific rule in the firewall for FTP stuff. It also does not, I can tell it to disable or not disable based on what the operating system does. And things like that. So these are just general run-of-the-mill, your general options that you're going to want to check on your firewall. However, what I can do is I can actually go in and configure certain things. So for example, when I go into networks, I can go into my networks here, the different ones that I'm connected to, and I can see what networks I am currently on and the rules that I have set for that. So for example, this is my main network here, internet. I can see what I'm connected by. I can see the network type, things like that. So if I go here, this gives me a little more options. I can select, the IP address that I'm on. I can change the name of it. I can select, what type of network it is and get some notifications and things like that. So that's pretty nice because you can kind of configure the network from this screen. And then I can also configure application rules. So what I can do actually is I can choose a certain application. So for example, Microsoft. I can go into Microsoft and I can look at the different applications that request use through the firewall, and I can set certain rules for that. So for example, say in OneNote, I want to go in here and I take a look at some of the things that it's saying that it needs. I can look at some of the rights that it has, and then I can add some network rules. So for example, right now I'm just saying you can just have all network activity. But if I wanted to, I could add a rule, and I could say, okay, I'm going to allow prompt for action or block any, for example, outbound, we'll just say TCP protocols. And then I specify the ports, and then I can say to any of the addresses here, and I can just add an address. So this really helps you so that you can kind of filter the different connections coming into your computer through the different applications. And it's really, really helpful because, for example, let's say that I have a program that's using UDP protocol, which is actually really well known for being very insecure and not very robust. I can set certain rules for the UDP protocol if a program uses it so that I know that it's safe and I never have to worry about it connecting and receiving things that it shouldn't. So that's really nice and helpful about that. Another really cool thing is that I can exclude, I can create certain exclusions and things like that. Not too many, just because this isn't a commercial firewall, and so it's a little difficult to kind of get certain things running on it, especially since it's not its own software. It's built into an antivirus, but you can create little exclusions here and there. And then finally, you can look at the history, and you can see like the things that the program has done through the firewall. You can also see like the files that it has. This is really nice. It actually lets you see which files specifically it's using to run. So that's really, really helpful, and that's a great feature of the firewall. And most firewalls are going to have this capability, so that's really nice. The last thing is configuring packet rules. This is really nice because you can actually configure certain protocols to do certain things. So for example, I'm blocking right now all TCP remote desktop traffic. So if anybody tries to use remote desktop to get into my computer, that port is blocked. The port for remote desktop is blocked on my computer. So there's nothing they can do to get in. It's closed. or for example, any incoming ICMP is also blocked, things like that. They're very, very helpful in case of certain things that I want to happen. So for example, the remote desktop, I just, for example, want a end all be all remote desktop rule that says block any of them. Doesn't even matter. And then anytime I try to use it, even if I try to use it, I won't be able to get through. So it's really, really helpful, and a lot of firewalls are going to have this packet rules. They aren't probably going to be called packet rules. It's going to have a different name per firewall. But almost every commercial and open source and business firewall is going to have these rules, because that's really what a firewall is all about, is opening and closing certain ports from networking, so that way it protects your computer. And so that is that's the firewall that I have here on my computer. And it works really, really well. I have not had a single issue with it. And most open source firewalls and most firewalls in general are going to have relatively the same settings. For example, in pfSense and IPFire and all of these different firewalls here, they're going to have more settings, mostly just because they are software specifically built as a firewall. And this, of course, like I said, is just a firewall built into an antivirus. It isn't actually its own firewall software. But the great thing about firewalls is that they are just they're very manageable, and they make it very easy for you to protect your network without being overly difficult or overly managed software. There are a lot of things that you have to kind of get a hold of. Like, for example, in pfSense, you have quite a bit of features here, and there's plenty more. So there's a lot of things you kind of have to understand. But a large majority of the things that you're worried about with your firewall are exactly like I explained here, application and packet rules. So that way your firewall will protect your network from both outbound and inbound connections through programs and networking protocols. And so that is our brief overview of firewalls. I really hope you enjoyed. Please let us know in the comments of this presentation how we did. If there's anything you want to know, we'll be glad to answer your questions the best we can. Thank you so much for watching.